The Republic of Venice arose in a unique geographical setting as its inhabitants sought refuge on small islands submerged by the waters of the Adriatic to shield themselves from the chaos of Germanic invasions following the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Nothing in those islands suggested the birth of a powerful state, yet the watery isolation became a natural fortress, and the city's position at the crossroads of trade between East and West transformed it into a meeting point of civilizations and a strategic hub around which a complex and efficient trade network developed. From the earliest centuries of its foundation, the Venetians understood that survival in such a harsh environment could only come through the sea. They devoted all their energy to building a powerful navy, mastering the secrets of commerce, and perfecting the art of negotiation with both the Muslim East and the Christian West. Gradually, their maritime power grew until Venice became a true naval legend, rivaled by only a few other nations. But its strength did not lie solely at sea. It extended to political administration and organization. The Republic developed a complex system balancing multiple powers. Its rulers maintained a delicate equilibrium between commercial interests and political influence. The Senate, composed of aristocratic elite families, governed effectively, while the election of the Doge followed a long and intricate process designed to prevent power from concentrating in the hands of a single man. Venice sought to be a republic ruled by reason, not by passions, an ambition that granted it long-term stability and made it less prone to coups or civil strife than its Italian neighbors. Yet just as this system gave Venice strength, it also sowed the seeds of its weakness. Over time, the Venetian aristocracy evolved from a dynamic and active class into a closed elite that monopolized power and blocked social mobility. Since the 14th century, the gates of governance were shut to the common people when the ruling families were recorded in the Book of Gold. Those not listed were barred from political life. This political isolation led to internal stagnation and a lack of innovation in governance. While the rest of Europe transformed, learned, and struggled for change, Venice clung to its old institutions as if time could never touch it. Worsening this stagnation was the gradual decline of trade, the backbone of Venetian power. By the late 15th century, the Portuguese had discovered a sea route to India around the Cape of Good Hope, diverting eastern trade through the Atlantic instead of the Mediterranean. This deprived Venice of its vital role as a commercial intermediary. Despite efforts to adapt, Venice lacked overseas colonies and the naval capacity to compete with rising powers such as Spain and Portugal. The Republic was not only drained by economic losses, but also by its frequent military conflicts, especially its prolonged wars with the Ottoman Empire. These wars cost Venice dearly in lives, wealth, and possessions throughout the eastern Mediterranean, from Cyprus to Crete. In the end, Venice found itself besieged on all sides. Global economic shifts redirected trade routes, new European powers rose on the back of great discoveries, and a rigid political system could no longer adapt to the spirit of the times. Perhaps the greatest challenge it faced was that, although Venice was aware of the changing world, it lacked both the will and the means to carry out the deep reforms needed to reclaim its former place. Its glory reflected a past more than it promised a future. Slowly but surely, Venice began to live off memories of its greatness until its downfall became the inevitable outcome of a long and exhausting decline. While the Republic of Venice maintained a brilliant facade of discipline and stability, its internal structure had begun to quietly crack, like a grand palace whose foundations were eroding out of sight. Despite the rigid political system it proudly upheld, a system that had long prevented tyranny and limited powers through balanced institutions, it eventually became a chain of iron that strangled change and stifled genuine reform. Power remained in the hands of a small aristocratic elite, the very class that had designed the system and inherited its privileges for generations. The Republic became, in effect, a closed club with no place for ambitious outsiders or fresh blood to revive the weakening body of the state. Though this elite class had helped establish strong institutions, the cost was steep. The middle classes, new merchants, and intellectuals were excluded from meaningful participation in governance. This suffocated initiatives and produced political and intellectual stagnation. The Republic prided itself on being a state of law and order, but in reality it was governed by a conservative mindset that feared risk and refused to break with tradition. even when those traditions no longer fit the times. As crises piled up, Venice proved unable to adopt new strategies or confront challenges with agility, relying instead on caution and delay, as if time were on its side, not against it. Economically, the domestic front suffered from visible stagnation. With the decline in the spice trade in Eastern goods, Venice lost a key source of wealth and failed to replace it, despite repeated attempts to expand into the Italian mainland. The merchant class, once the engine of the economy, was now confined to local markets, a shadow of the vast routes that once stretched from Alexandria to Constantinople. This economic stagnation deepened class inequality. Wealth became concentrated in the hands of a few, the middle class eroded, and broad segments of the population were left on the margins of both economic and political life. Beyond its borders, Europe had changed drastically. New states emerged from the Middle Ages, driven by the spirit of exploration and expansion: Portugal, Spain, then Britain, the Netherlands, and France. These nations boasted powerful armies, modern fleets, and economies freed from old monopolies. Most importantly, they embodied the spirit of the age: exploration, capitalism, and modernity. On the opposite shore, the Ottoman Empire remained a formidable force, stretching from the Balkans to the Levant and controlling ports that had once been part of Venice's sphere of influence. With every war against the Ottomans, Venice lost more colonies and territories, suffering losses it could no longer recoup. The external threat was not merely military, it was also civilizational. As European capitals opened to the New World and established overseas empires, Venice remained confined to its narrow Adriatic geography and a Mediterranean mindset that no longer sufficed in an age dominated by oceans. Matters worsened as Venice became entangled in a web of complex alliances during the Italian Wars, reduced to a chess piece between France and the Holy Roman Empire. It was used as a tool in the hands of stronger powers, without holding any real cards of its own. Despite all this, the Republic maintained a stern face to the world, cloaked in grandeur, as if still capable of keeping up with the great powers. But reality grew bleaker by the day. Internally, the Republic was fragile, suffering from political decay and economic contraction. Externally, it was surrounded by rivals that neither acknowledged its thousand-year history nor respected its past glory. Thus, Venice resembled an old ship sailing stormy seas, with tattered sails, an exhausted crew, resisting collapse with the last of its dignity, but without compass or real hope of rescue. When Napoleon Bonaparte's star rose on Europe's horizon, he was more than a promising military commander. He embodied a new age born from the French Revolution. It was an age that rejected ancient traditions and feared no authority of the old world. He brought with him a tidal wave of change, merciless and swift, and saw in old states like Venice symbols of an obsolete order that must be erased. Indeed, his Italian campaign of 1796 revealed just how unprepared and powerless Venice was in the face of a new reality. At that time, revolutionary France was locked in open conflict with Europe's royal alliances and sent its armies into the Italian peninsula to break Austria's grip on the region. Though Venice officially maintained a neutral stance, its true position was more ambiguous. It distrusted the French Revolution and its principles, but was also not a true ally of Austria. This political hesitance made it seem unreliable to both sides. Napoleon, seeing Venice as an obstacle to his ambitions in northern Italy, seized the chance to justify its invasion. The campaign began with force, and Napoleon swiftly overran Milan and Lombardy, delivering crushing blows to the Austrians. With every victory, the balance of power shifted, and Venice had neither the strength to protect its mainland holdings nor the resolve to confront France. In its cities, pro-French and pro-revolutionary movements began to emerge, while the Venetian Senate, mired in internal disputes, could neither commit to resistance nor surrender. In the spring of 1797, Napoleon turned his attention directly to Venice, accusing it of inciting violence against French soldiers and supporting counter-revolutionary movements. Though not all these accusations were accurate, the Republic was no longer capable of defending itself, militarily or diplomatically. Napoleon's forces stood at its gates, its territory surrounded, and its once mighty navy had become a shadow of its former self. there was no choice but to yield, and so the Senate, on May 13, 1797, voted to surrender the city without a fight, thus ending over 1,000 years of independence. Venice did not fall in a grand battle shaking the earth, but in a meeting room worn down by hesitation, where a decision was made because no other was possible. The French entered the city with relative calm. Napoleon looted its treasures, dissolved the Senate, abolished the Doge, and brought down the curtain on the ancient institutions of the Republic. But he did not keep Venice for long. As part of larger strategic calculations, he ceded the city to the Austrian Empire under the Treaty of Campo Formio in October of the same year. It was a cold exchange in which great powers traded the Venetian legacy like merchandise, indifferent to what the Republic had represented politically, culturally, and economically for centuries. What stings most about this ending is that it was not the result of a clash between equal wills, but a manifestation of internal collapse. Venice was not so much defeated as it was hollowed out, left behind by the New World like a forgotten page in a history book. It continued to sing of past glories, unaware that time had passed it by, and that the sea that once carried it to greatness now bore witness to its slow drowning. Venice fell as a political entity, disappearing from the maps of the great powers. But what truly fell was only the outer shell of a civilization that remained alive, rooted in the world's memory and in the European soul that had always viewed Venice as an eternal city, not confined to institutions or borders. The Republic was like a rare historical organism, born of fear and defiance, carving its path through a merciless sea to become a unique example of what human will can achieve when paired with cunning and adaptability. Even after its institutions were abolished, its lands occupied, and its treasures looted, neither Napoleon's armies nor those that came after him could extinguish the light Venice had ignited over the centuries. For 1,000 years, the Republic had been a melting pot of cultures, a bridge between the Islamic East and the Christian West, a city unlike any other. In its alleys, the call to prayer from Aleppo mingled with the bells of churches overlooking the Grand Canal. It was a city scented with the fragrance of commerce, books, and paints, a city whose ships once carried spices and manuscripts and returned laden with ideas, art, and gold. No other city combined sword and brush, statecraft and commerce, diplomacy and war as Venice did. It was a school of political realism before the term Machiavellianism was coined, a laboratory of constitutional systems before modern democracies rose. In Venice, power was neither absolute nor autocratic. It was forged through layered councils, deliberations, and balances, which helped it endure the chaos of the Middle Ages and the tempests of the Renaissance. On the other hand, General Karl Marx's Austrian army, around 72,000 men, was plagued by structural and organizational weaknesses. Though disciplined, it was rigid and lacked the adaptability that had come to define Napoleonic warfare. Marx's forces were entrenched around Ulm, waiting for the Russian reinforcements without making sufficient preparations for a rapid French advance. Morale among the Austrians was shaky, leadership was unclear, and internal disagreements among the staff led to indecision and hesitation. While Mack expected a French attack from the west through the Black Forest, Napoleon devised a completely opposite plan. He exploited surprise and speed, aiming for a massive strategic flanking movement from the northeast. His goal was to encircle Mack's army completely, cutting it off from its supply lines and any potential retreat to Vienna or union with Allied forces. To execute this plan, Napoleon ordered his army to cross the Rhine at multiple points, then march east through Frankfurt toward the Danube, performing a vast arcing maneuver that surrounded Ulm from the north and east. His use of independent corps allowed him to send them along parallel paths, each capable of temporary self-sustained combat, and converge them when needed for overwhelming force. During this advance, Napoleon used deception to mislead the Austrians into thinking he was still positioned in the west. Light cavalry units and feint maneuvers, especially under Marshal Murat, played a crucial role. Meanwhile, corps under Davout, Lannes, Soult, and Bernadotte crossed the Danube north of Ulm, then swung south to isolate the city. The strategy was to lull Mack into a false sense of security and keep him in a defensive posture inside Ulm, while Napoleon closed the circle around him, cutting off reinforcements from Vienna or Russia and sealing escape routes eastward. By mid-October, the maneuver reached its peak. Austrian forces were surrounded on three sides, with French troops controlling both banks of the Danube, making retreat impossible. General Mack's last-ditch attempts to break out failed under constant French pressure. Napoleon didn't rely on a massive pitched battle. Instead, he used precise positioning and rapid calculated movements to shut down every avenue of escape. His campaign reflected the core of his military philosophy: strike before the enemy fully assembles and neutralize an entire army through maneuver, rather than bloodshed. With communications to the east severed and Ulm encircled, Mack found himself isolated from the rest of the coalition. Russian forces were still crawling westward from deep within Poland, while Austrian supplies dwindled and morale collapsed. Desperate breakout attempts were repelled by Davout and Soult, while Murat's forces tightened the noose from the north and west. Ulm had become a massive military trap. It was clear to everyone, both inside and outside the city, that the Austrian army's only choices were surrender or annihilation. On October 20th, 1805, after fruitless consultations among Austrian officers, General Mack surrendered to the French. In a scene filled with symbolism, he exited the city with his guard and handed his sword to Napoleon's officers. French troops entered Ulm without having fought a major battle inside. Over 27,000 Austrian soldiers were taken prisoner, along with massive quantities of artillery, ammunition, and supplies, all with minimal French losses and without costly direct combat. This outcome was far more than a tactical victory. It marked a strategic turning point in the war. Militarily, Napoleon had eliminated an entire Austrian army in one blow and opened the road to Vienna, now defenseless. Politically, Austria's defeat shook the coalition's confidence, and fractures began appearing in the Third Coalition. Psychologically, the French army's morale soared. They believed in their leader's genius and felt invincible. Meanwhile, Austrian morale drowned in confusion and doubt, and their entire defensive strategy had to be reconsidered. Ulm proved that victory in war doesn't always require blood and steel. It can also be won through intellect, movement, and mastery of time and space. The surrender at Ulm crowned a meticulously planned campaign in which Napoleon compressed months of fighting into mere days of maneuver. Once Ulm fell and the Austrian army surrendered, the consequences began to unfold on every level. This was no mere battlefield gain. It was a strategic shock that overturned the balance of power in Europe. With an entire army gone and no major battle fought, Austria was dealt a crushing blow. Vienna lay unprotected, and in just a few weeks, Napoleon entered the Austrian capital in triumph, showing that French campaigns were no longer isolated strikes, but decisive invasions that redrew maps. Venice was the first to understand that politics is fleeting, but culture endures. Ports may empty of ships, but souls do not empty of longing. And so, those who visit the city today do not seek remnants of power, but fragments of spirit, the echo of a civilization still breathing in the shadows of its columns, in the carvings of its facades, in the trembling of water along its narrow canals. Perhaps Napoleon ended it with a stroke of his pen. Perhaps the great powers divided its legacy like quarreling heirs. Yet despite that, Venice remains something beyond borders, the republic of the sea and the mind. It ended as a state, but began as a legacy, one that does not die, not in books, nor in the European conscience, nor in the eyes of those who walk its streets and feel they've entered a city that stepped out of history and now hangs suspended between water and sky.